If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Serious, what are some scary urban legends and cryptids you have heard of? I don't know how common this is, although in my state there is an area of woods referred to as the Seven Gates of Hell. The story goes that there used to be a mental hospital nestled in the middle of the woods. The first and second gate are overtaken by the tall grass, and the only original standing parts of the entrance. Apparently there was a massive fire that consumed the hospital. Some perished, others were left to make their way through the woods. If you plan to go, you need to go at sundown. Once you pass through the first two gates and proceed, you begin to hear a rustling in the bushes. However, even approaching the fourth gate is where most people decide to turn back. You feel as if you're being watched or someone/something is rushing around you. The legend has it that you begin to hear whispers or shouts as you're getting closer to the seventh gate. The very last gate is supposed to be the mental hospital in flames. Whether or not you can find the trail to return to the first gate is unknown. I had a Native American roommate during college, and one night when we were stupid high I offhandedly asked him if he knew anything about Wendigos. He was sober in an instant and told me that the legend of the Wendigo is very serious fucking business. He went on to say that the way that Wendigos are often portrayed in media, Until Dawn is the example he used, incorrectly, and that they are actually malicious shamans who put horrific curses on people for shits and giggles and also possess the ability to shapeshift into animals. He then said he would tell me exactly one story about the Wendigo and then the conversation would be finished forever. His grandpa would go coyote hunting, mainly for population control, during the evening/nighttime in the southern CO wilderness. One night, he is stalking a really elusive coyote when he finally lines up a kill shot and hits the coyote through the heart/lungs with a shot from his rifle. The coyote bolts and Grandpa continues to track it by its blood trail. The trail leads into some really dense scrub that a human couldn't walk through, so he circles the bushes looking for the trail. On the other side of the bushes the blood trail continues, with human footprints instead of a coyote's. Grandpa gets overwhelmed with a sense of dread and clicks on a flashlight. There's a human figure standing in the darkness maybe 20 feet away from him. Grandpa doesn't even hesitate for a second, he turns tail and sprints back to his truck, then drives the fuck out of there. My roommate also said that Grandpa had to stop for gas on the way back, and when he was filling up the tank he heard something in the desert, maybe not the most accurate term but CO people know what I'm talking about it. He's trying to figure out where it's coming from when he realizes that there is just a wall of black beyond the gas station's lights. As in, he literally couldn't see anything beyond the limits of this tiny gas station, like it was an island and shrouded in darkness. He can't even see the road that he was just driving on. He gets hella freaked out again and GTFOs back home. That's where the story stops. Never really believed in anything supernatural, but that shit gave my stoned ass the willies. So this is an urban legend in my school's 4th floor bathroom. Basically a student walks into one of the stalls and does her business. Then a voice starts to whisper to her saying respicide over and over. She starts getting freaked out, so she finishes up and leaves as fast as she could without looking back. Then she tells the story to her very religious teacher, who happens to be a good friend of hers. The girl mentioned the weird whispers and the teacher's face turned pale, because the word respicide is Latin, and if translated into English, the voice was telling her to look up the whole time. Not exactly an urban legend, but here it goes. There was a wealthy old woman my mom used to work for when I was a teenager who lived all alone in a centuries-old house. She had mobility issues, so she had lived in the dining room only for decades, which she had converted to a living room/bedroom. When my mom was busy I would do odd jobs for the woman, who would send me into different rooms of the house to tidy up. These rooms hadn't been opened in 20 or 30 years, and there were 2 or 3 that used to be her late husband's medical practice. There was an actual human skeleton hanging in the examination room, medical supplies that were 30 years out of date all just lying around. It was creepy, but nothing really scary. A few times when I went down to get paid after finishing up, we'd hear noises like someone was walking around in the house, and she'd nonchalantly just say, "It's just spooks." I never believed in ghosts and still don't. One night though, when she was out of town, she wanted someone to watch the house because she was afraid of break-ins. My dad and I stayed over, and after we had locked all the doors and windows and got ready to go to sleep, I heard someone walking in the halls. I shot out of bed immediately to find my dad doing the same. He was an engineer and a die-hard skeptic, so it really scared me when he said, "Let's get the hell out of here." We left in the middle of the night and never went back. In my hometown there's this road out in the country but not too far from the town itself. It's actually quite pleasant in the daytime, gorgeous in the fall, but at night it's extremely creepy. Local legend is kind of fuzzy, but the most common backstory is there was a man named Old Man, name of road, and he lived on the road with his wife. He was very popular with the local children, and the parents got suspicious of child molestation, so they burned down his house with him and his wife in it. Basically the plot of Nightmare on Elm Street, so that kinda takes away from its credibility emo, but still a creepy story. There's more lore about the road's backstory, though. It's said there have been several fatal car crashes. My town has a very high DUI fatality rate, and the road has many near 90-degree turns with very little warning, deep ditches just about guaranteed to flip your car if you go off, and a fast speed limit, so I wouldn't doubt those claims at all, and there's a bridge on the road where it's said a girl committed suicide. The town also has some known cult activity, so it's not necessarily uncommon to see hooded figures and bonfires on the road at night. I haven't seen any personally, but I've only been on the road at night a couple of times. I've heard stories of cultists on the road though, and have seen evidence of cult activity in town, a lot of beheaded animals after Halloween, most notably, so I wouldn't doubt it. The game is pretty much you loop the road 3 times in the dark. The first time it appears relatively normal, aside from the creepy graffiti near the bridge. The second time there's a feeling of dread and you're likely to see things in the trees, and the third time Old Man, road name, supposedly appears in your rear view mirror. It's also said that if you stop your car on the bridge it won't start again. I've personally played the game once, but I couldn't get my friends to agree to loop it a third time. I will say the second time was a lot scarier than the first, even if only psychological. I didn't see anything too creepy aside from a massive red penis graffitied on the bridge. My friend thought it was a girl's face in a red hood the first loop around. I will note the eerie lack of animals on the road, though, at least the night we played. That area has a lot of raccoon/opossum/deer and such, and we saw quite a few on the way to the road, so it was a little weird we didn't see any on the road itself. In Kentucky, we have enough Dogman sightings and stories that we have regional variations. The one in particular that sticks with me is the legend of the Beast of Land between the lakes. Sightings date back to pre-Jackson Purchase days in that area. French fur trappers described a 7.5-foot tall man covered in thick black fur, with a head of a large wolf and long talons at the end of human hands. The loop guru they called M, it made M avoid western Kentucky like the plague. The legend I heard growing up that always disturbed me was that one of them killed a whole family locked in their camper, one humid Kentucky May night in the early 80s. Tore the door off its hinges. The boys at the state forensics lab up in Frankfurt couldn't identify the hair sample from the scene. Legend has it the sample came back canine, unknown. Legend also has it that the state police found the parents and teenage son arranged in a pile of viscera and limbs on the camper floor, and splattered all over the walls. They followed a blood trail 50 yards to a tree line. The state police found the family's little girl 20 feet up a tree, half eaten. I always heard that the feds took over the investigation, covered it up to prevent panic. They even destroyed all the RV pads with the electrical outlets and water lines. I hear that all the state police homicide detectives that were there that morning died in psych wards, disappeared, or changed their name and left the state. Fun campfire story. So in my town, there was this story that some witches had been released out into the wild by the ruling party of the state by mistake. They would come up to your house and ask for onions and lemons. If you refused to give it to her, you would die. But if you did give it to her, she would cut the lemon, and if it was red inside, she would throw the onion onto the wall, and the number of pieces it split into would be the number of people that would die in your family. And if the lemon was normal, nothing happened. After all of this she would leave. If you touched her against her will to throw her off of your property, you would die. The feet of these witches faced backwards. And the way to ward her off? Put the imprint of your hand with red paint next to your front door. The hand was a symbol of the opposing party at the time. As a kid, I used to be terrified of these witches. Anywhere I went I would always look over the shoulder terrified. Turns out these witches did exist. Because one of my neighbors was visited by her. But they had some kind of ball of steel, as they, instead of being scared of her, they beat her up. Turns out it was a dude cross-dressing and using prosthetics to make the legs face the opposite way. It was all propaganda from the opposing party to make people distrust the ruling party, as well as to put the symbols of the opposing party at every doorstep. A huge oof. Northern Colorado has Tommyknockers, traditionally small creatures or spirits in mining garb that would steal unattended food and gold from miners. Also have heard telling of them being the vengeful spirits of miners who never made it back to the surface. Third bridge. The third of a series of bridges in rural Colorado that once you're on the third you can hear the sounds of Native American war drums and the sounds of a fierce battle raging across the plains, or the sounds of teens who were killed on the bridge depending on who you ask. Riverdale Road in Thornton, Colorado has Hell's Gate, an old torn down chunk of the front gate to an old burned down mansion that supposedly the man who built heard voices and ignited his house after he locked his wife and children in their rooms. It said you can still hear his wild howling and laughter through the cottonwood trees that line Riverdale Road. Within the property there is supposed to be an underground room that survived the burning that appears untouched. I'm pretty sure this doesn't actually exist though, as my group of idiot friends spent lots of hours on Riverdale as teens getting into shenanigans. There is also a woman in white tail associated with the property of a woman who went thrill seeking and died and cries for people to help her find her way back to the road. If you see her on the main road and stop to help, she will continue sobbing and walking but never look at you. Riverdale also sports a murdered boy myth that says he will call for help. You'll never see him, but when you make it off Riverdale you'll see bloody handprints on your car. Not sure if anyone said this one yet, but skin crawlers are scary as fuck. One of the stories is that someone's driving down the road in a truck by some Native American caves or temples in the West, and they see this bear that has an exposed heart and a skull instead of a face. So they immediately turn their truck around so they don't hit it, and it jumps like 50 feet in the air and lands in front of them. The skin crawler kills them and then uses their skin. So basically what a skin crawler is a demon that possesses dead corpses to stay alive. They can be animal or human. The longer they've used a body, or skin, it starts decaying and they need a new one. To make it worse, if you think about them and are scared of them, they can sense and target you. So one day I was out in the woods with a couple of my friends and neighbors. My neighbors had to go back to their house for lunch, so me and my friends decided to split up and look around the woods for some branches to build a fort out of. My friends went a little further out than I did, so I was waiting at the fort for a bit for them to come back when I heard rustling behind me. I figured it was just a deer because there was and still are a ton of them in my area, so I just kinda ignored it, but I kept hearing it back and forth in what sounded like the same spot but getting closer each time. I tried to ignore it, but I eventually turned around and I saw what looked like a person on all fours covered in moss and dirt, and then they ran away. Scared the Jesus out of me, so I ran away, but yeah, never found out what it was. Had to text my neighbors that I had gone inside. My friends saw me sprinting up the hill to my house. Not super spooky, but it gives me the chills to remember what it looked like. My grandparent told us about Manda. Manda are the spirits of drowned victims that appear as bloated corpses with weed tangled in their hair. They are usually described as having a childlike appearance, perhaps because victims of water-related accidents in ancient Vietnam were often children. Story go with the two boys played hide and seek at late afternoon. The younger one hid near the river next to their house, accidentally drowned. He called help but the sound not clearly, plus it was dark. The older one heard the sound but not realized it was his brother call for help. After several minutes, he couldn't found his brother, so he thought maybe his bro tired of playing and went home, so he went back home. That night, when the family realized their son was missing, they went searching to find their son's corpse. The next day, they funeral for their son. The older at that time saw his brother's face in the window near his brother coffin. His face was blue, weed tangled in his hair, looked straight to the older brother. And every night, he saw his brother on the window, near the gate, near the river. His brother called him to go near the river, to play together again. Too scared, the older brother told his grandma, and she said it was not her grandson, it was Manda who took the younger brother's figure to deceive people and drown them. So she made a tool, I forgot what it was, burned some joss papers and chased the Manda. But it not the end, the older brother need to stay inside the house until his brother funeral was done. If he go outside, he can't think straight and go to the river, drown himself, and another Manda will take his figure like how they did with his brother again. The Jinn. I can remember an encounter that my cousin told me. So my cousin and the rest of the females of the family sleep on one big sheet together, since they all wake up in unison to pray, and it's a cultural thing. She said her aunt woke her up in the middle of the night asking for water, so my cousin went and got her a glassful. When she re-entered the room, her aunt was just standing in the corner of the room, facing the wall. My cousin called out her name, and the distorted, raspy voice of a man answers, "Did you bring me what I asked?" You're not supposed to speak to a jinn, and you're supposed to give in to small requests, like a glass of water, or else the jinn will come back and ask for something greater. My cousin quietly sets the glass on the ground, and quickly curls up next to her other aunts. She said she stayed awake for hours out of fear, but didn't hear anything. Not her aunt moving from the corner, not the water being drank. Next morning, everyone woke up together, as usual, and my cousin immediately questioned her aunt about last night, though the aunt insisted she had never asked for anything and had just slept soundly. But the glass from across the room was completely empty. The one that sticks with me is: a woman is driving home at night down a dark back road. She passes a big 18-wheeler, which swerves into the left lane behind her right after she passes and begins flashing its lights. She checks to make sure her brights aren't on, they aren't, and speeds up, thinking the truck driver must be angry with her. but he keeps riding her bumper, periodically flashing his lights. Eventually, she pulls into her driveway, and the truck pulls right behind her, brights on full blast. The trucker runs up to the car carrying a loaded shotgun and fires into her backseat. She turns around and sees a dead man laying on her floorboards with a knife in his hand. I don't get in a vehicle without checking the backseat, no matter how sure I am that I locked the doors, because of this old and infamous urban legend. We have a few related to the abandoned coal mines on the edge of town. Many people believe that the mines are actually haunted by two white witches. This was a lot to type, so I pulled it from a local news site. In the 1870s, there was a woman named Mary who was the nanny of several children. All of the children she cared for died of illnesses or other unknown causes. Enraged, the town charged her with witchcraft after discovering evidence of sorcery rituals at her home. She was hanged immediately and her property destroyed. Mary now haunts the mines, seeking revenge for her unjust end. The second white witch was a midwife named Sarah Norton. On a stormy night, she had been on her way to deliver a baby when her carriage tipped over, and her body and skull were crushed. Sarah was not religious and didn't want a funeral, but the townspeople insisted on giving her a funeral anyway. On the day of the funeral, there was a terrible storm that caused the funeral to be postponed. The funeral continued to be delayed due to sudden and mysterious storms. Finally, the town decided to just bury her in the cemetery. If you visit the abandoned cemetery now, you may be able to see her ghost guarding the tombstones. Another big one used to be Gravity Hill. Basically, you can stop your car almost anywhere on the road and the ghosts of children killed in a bus accident on that road will push you to safety past where they died. That road is shut down now, too many of us raising hell and getting into trouble back in the mid-90s, coupled with the old ranchers' willingness to put birdshot in your ass, and added to the housing development going in on the other end caused the city to treat it as a private road. But before that happened, the party spot was called the Gates of Hell. It was rumored to be a satanic cult meeting place or something, and if I remember correctly, a woman and her boyfriend murdered her ex there. As a New Jersey resident, I am very proud to have our own dedicated urban legend. In the 1700s, a woman named Deborah Smith married a man named Mr. Leeds. She became pregnant with her 13th child, which she did not want because the number is supposedly unlucky. The birth was extremely difficult, and when the baby was born, it was a normal baby. Mrs. Leeds noticed, however, that the baby was beginning to develop strange characteristics. It was growing hairy all over its body, and small stumps grew on the baby's head. The feet turned to hooves, and the eyes turned discolored. Mrs. Leeds believed the baby was the spawn of Satan, and therefore she locked it in a broom closet. She never went near it, and she barely fed it. Despite the lack of food, the baby grew very quickly and grew more hair. It quickly began to look like a devil. It now had goat hooves and legs, with a long snout with sharp teeth. It also grew a sharp, pitchfork tail, and long grotesque wings. One night, it grew so strong, it broke out of the broom closet and went on a rampage. It went killing midwives, and tearing apart its siblings. It then killed Mrs. Leeds, and flew through the chimney into the Pine Barrens. Sightings continued throughout history, some claiming that it ate goats and livestock. One man claimed that he was riding in a carriage, when the Jersey Devil, or Leeds Devil as some call it, swooped out of the trees. It charged at the man's horses, killing them both with its teeth. I then turned to the man, and shot fire out of its mouth such as a dragon would. The man lived to tell the tale, but people believe the legend was false. Although today, there are still skeptics who camp in the Pine Barrens searching for the creature. Mano Woods from Connecticut. They're reclusive people who live in the woods mostly. You can be driving through the wooded areas that used to be farmland in the 1600s and 1700s. Where you see stone walls that go up into the woods and kinda see something at the side of the road that looks like a person, but when you look directly at it, you don't see it. They used to be seen along old Route 7 before it became heavily populated. That whole route was an Indian path for 10,000 years and had plenty of water and forage material. Because of societal encroachment, they have moved further north. They know when they're being observed and can camouflage instantly. It's said they're small in stature, nonverbal, and have limited intelligence. More like highly evolved instinct. Sometimes they will stay in barns on farmland at night, but they do some simple chore to pay for their stay. If you leave biscuits or vegetables out for them, they will maybe stack some wood in the night. They don't eat meat. They've never been reported to hurt anyone. Some old farmers who they trust through the years have seen them walking at the far edge of their fields. In Colorado, we have the legend of Third Bridge. The story goes that there was a big battle between pioneers and a local tribe which resulted in the tribe being massacred. Legend has it if you stand on this bridge at night you can hear war drums beating, and on occasion if you look down the riverbed a ways you can see the ghost of the chieftain on his horse trotting towards the bridge preparing for his final charge into battle. Basically you take a major road east until it turns to a dirt road, and continue along until you cross a first bridge, a second bridge, and you guessed it, get to a third bridge. There's a creepy isolated barn a ways off the road. All the times I've been out there it had a green or red light above the barn doors, which definitely added to the eeriness. We went regularly in high school trying to scare ourselves, or have a story to tell the next day, but we never heard the drums, much less saw the ghost. My friends would swear up and down that one time we returned to our car to find it covered in handprints in the dust, but forgot I had wandered back that way to take a leak earlier and failed to realize they were all the same size and matched my hands perfectly. This was back when I was very, very young, like 5 or 6 years old, and living in Canada. Next to my school was a pretty big forest, and there was a legend that a man lived in there and hunted anyone who dared to wander in. A couple of the older kids from the middle school across the street convinced a few of us younger kids to go in one day after school. I remember there being a ton of really crunchy leaves because I was worried the noise would draw the forest man to us, but we got pretty far in before anything happened. Luckily it was still light out when we came to a clearing surrounding an old, defunct bit of train tracks. I guess most of the tracks outside the forest had been totally removed to make way for buildings, but they'd left the bit in the forest since they weren't really in the way of anything. They were raised up a couple feet and sort of formed a wall, but had been broken down by years without use and a lot of the concrete had crumbled, so there were bits we could climb to get up. I say it was lucky that it was light out because as soon as we started to climb those tracks, a man appeared on top of them out of nowhere and scared the hell out of us. If it had been dark, I'm not sure we would have noticed him before we were up there standing right next to him. All of us panicked and dropped down, backing off but not really sure if we needed to run. He looked pretty normal, to the point where I can't really remember anything special about him now. But after a second he just started yelling at us, bellowing about how we couldn't be there and threatening to wring our necks. We bolted all the way back to school and then went our separate ways, shaken up but refusing to talk about anything that had just happened. Like a week later one of the middle school kids who'd gone with us disappeared and everyone at both schools were sure the man had hunted him down and killed him. The rest of us who went into the forest were terrified. I moved to the US a couple months after that, but as far as I know nothing else happened to the other kids. At this point I'm pretty sure the kid who disappeared probably just also moved. But a friend who still lives in the area tells me the legend is still going strong, with our little adventure added in and embellished for more detail. At our middle school, there is supposedly a child ghost that walks the halls after hours. We have had several student deaths over the years, mostly underage driving wrecks, but the prevailing theory is that it's the ghost of the first death, a little boy whose portrait was up in the entryway when I first started working there. He died of an unrelated terminal illness but apparently haunts the school for some reason, perhaps missing his friends that he left behind. Most accounts of sightings are pretty debatable. The only one I take seriously is our school officers. He's very professional and not the type to make stuff up. He was patrolling halls after hours and heard the sounds of a child's running feet right in front of him, sneakers scuffing the floors, squeaking shoes, etc., darting from room to room. It was just him and the old night janitor who was downstairs. He chased the sounds for a bit but saw nothing even though the sounds were a couple feet away from him at all times. Personally I haven't seen or experienced anything there after hours, but I just count myself lucky. I heard this urban legend, Japanese I think, where two 12-year-old girls go to summer camp. One night one of them can't sleep, I don't remember the names, so we'll call her Lena. So she goes to her friend, we'll call her Beth, and asks her to go exploring. Beth is hesitant, but Lena insists, so she gives in. Suddenly when they leave the cabin, Lena has to go to the bathroom really bad. So they go to the bathroom and Lena goes in. She sees someone out of the corner of her eye, gets scared and runs out. She tells Beth, and she goes white in the face. "Do you know what day it is?" Beth said. "No." "Why?" "It's probably just another camper." Lena replied. "It's the 6th, on the days with the 6th of every month, she comes and waits for her prey. In order to not be harmed by her, you have to cough 3 times, and leave a food offering. There's only one of her though. If you don't do it now, she will follow you home." Lena left a rice cracker. They go back to the cabin, but Lena has to go to the bathroom so bad, that she gives in and thinks I have been going to the bathroom my whole life. Why should I let this affect me? She walks into the bathroom, and the monster girl is still there. Suddenly, Lena's stomach drops. She forgot to cough 3 times. The girl jumps at her, and the next morning, she's found dead. Hachishaku-sama is an 8 feet tall woman also known as the woman version of Slender Man. This is an urban legend of Japan, a personal experience from someone else who we'll call Suai. Includes that one day when she was 8 to 6 she was outside, then she heard a noise she began looking for it when she saw a hat on the tall hedges. They were tall and about 8 feet tall. Then the hat began to move. Then emerged a tall, long, man, who then disappeared into the hedges. The little girl began to make excuses to why she was so tall. She was wearing stilts. Maybe some high heels, she was making a lot of excuses. She then dropped what she was playing with and went to tell her grandparents who she was staying with in Japan for the summer what she saw. Her grandmother was drinking tea and her grandfather was reading the newspaper. Suai explained how weird-looking woman was hat and all. She kept making this sound Then grandparents stopped. Grandpa looked at Suai and took her by the shoulders and asked her, "How tall was she?" "As tall as the hedges." The grandparents gasped before the grandpa left the house and went somewhere while the grandma watched over Suai. He came back with an elderly woman who told Suai to go up to her room. She then put salt bowls in the corners of the room and covered the windows with ancient runes. Then put Buddha in the middle. The woman told Suai to not to leave the room under any circumstances, then gave Suai a bucket. Only leave the room after 7:30 a.m. Suai went to sleep. Then woke up to a tapping sound at 1 a.m. Probs just a tree. Then heard a sound of her grandpa knocking at the door. "Hello, are you okay? I can give you some company if you want." Hearing her grandpa's voice was better and soothing. Though something wasn't right. She then looked around, and saw the salt in all corners turn black. Then she heard the sound thumping over and over again, gradually growing faster and faster. She then went to the Buddha and began to pray. She prayed for so long that she didn't realize it was 7:30 a.m. She opened the door and ran to her grandparents' room, and then went to the airport where she went back home. There had been people who had fortunately escaped the woman, and would be safe as long as they didn't go back to Japan. Her grandpa restricted her from his funeral, to protect her. She couldn't go back, Suai could never go back, no matter what. My old elementary school was big on Blood Mary. It didn't help that one of the bathrooms in the elementary building gave us such bad vibes. To this day we swear it's haunted. And it makes sense, the school was super old, had seen 2 churches burn down and be rebuilt, and most of my friends' grandparents and great-grandparents attended school there. It has a little concrete area with a basketball court, but that's right next to actual holy ground. Meaning, land behind the church with numerous unmarked graves, prayer areas, and a little trail the priest would walk on. When we were little, if someone cashed a ball off the blacktop and onto the holy ground, we would say, "Make the sign of the cross of Bloody Mary's gonna get you." And we'd pretty much always make the sign of the cross. What sucks is we only have weird experiences in that creepy bathroom after not following the one rule. It also didn't help that the oldest kids in school would come to that bathroom just to chant Bloody Mary and I hate you 3 times. While we were in there. And we'd cry, we were so scared. One of the worst experiences was when my cousin was in the stall with me. I was covered in ticks after tripping on the holy ground, so she was helping me find them all. Then the lights flashed off. That bathroom did have automatic off lights, but it also has a switch. The way the stall was, my cousin could see the doorway and light switch through the cracks. She watched as the switch moved up and down. Once the lights were off we just sat there quietly, getting super scared and shaking. Then we heard the sink turn on. These sinks didn't have sensors either, they had 2 handles, and they were low-key hard to turn. When the sink turned on, we both got down on our knees behind the toilet and looked under the stall, and didn't see anything. We sat there staring and listening to the sink for a good few minutes. Then we heard tapping. At that point we both screamed and a teacher ran in to check on us, and when she came in the lights were out and the sink was overflowing. We cried for probably the rest of the day and my grandma had to come pick me up to finish pulling ticks off of me. Ever since, I've refused to go in bathrooms like that alone. Especially ones without windows and sketchy vibes. 3 that I grew up hearing all take place in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. 1. The ghost cop car. This ghost dwells in Rome's Golden Gate Park during the night looking for drivers to pull over. This ghost officer mostly targets drivers who are driving Golden Gate Park without their headlights on and issues them a citation after pulling them over. But when the traffic offender tries to pay the fine, police records will show that the officer who issued the citation passed away roughly 10 years ago. In some instances, witnesses of this ghost officer advises those who are being pulled over by a police officer in Golden Gate Park during the night to drive outside the park before pulling over. This act will result in the ghost officer vanishing into the darkness behind you. Online sources state that the ghost officer of Golden Gate Park was a fallen police officer who was killed in a car accident while patrolling in Golden Gate Park. The fallen police officer crashed into a car that didn't have its headlights on at an intersection inside the park, resulting in him being killed instantly on impact. 2. The Lady in White of Stowe Lake. From the GGP website, the famous ghost story and legend of Stowe Lake has been circulating for nearly 100 years, and it goes something like this. Once upon a time at Stowe Lake, in Golden Gate Park, there was a lady who was walking her baby in a stroller. After a while, this lady got tired and rested on the bench next to the lake, with the stroller right next to her. While she was sitting, another lady came to sit down next to her and they started talking. While they were conversing, the stroller rolled away unnoticed. The stroller with the baby fell in the lake. After the two women finished talking, the lady noticed her baby was gone and panicked right away. She then walked around Stowe Lake and asked people, "Have you seen my baby?" She spent all day and all night asking everyone. When the night was over, the last place she checked was the lake. She went into the lake looking for her baby, and ever since, she hasn't been seen again. It is rumored that if someone goes to Stowe Lake at night, weird occurrences take place. Stories have been told that the lady comes up from the lake, or the statue in her honor comes to life, or she will come up to you and ask, "Have you seen my baby?" Other reports say if you drive there with your friends in a group of cars, all the cars will stall at the same time. Another rumor is said that, if someone says, white lady, I have your baby" 3 times, the lady will appear. She'll ask you, "Have you seen my baby?" If you say yes, she'll haunt you, and if you say no, she'll kill you. Funny story. I was there with a group of friends drinking 40s one night in November years ago, and one of the guys had his old Halloween costume in his car. One of those Jesus costumes. So he put it on, draped the wig over his face and ran at us yelling the phrase. Scared the shit out of us. 3. Satanists on Strawberry Hill. Strawberry Hill is a hill in the middle of Stowe Lake, which has the ruins of an observatory destroyed in the '06 quake on top. It's said that Satanists use the ruins as a ceremonial altar of sorts, and if you go to SL at night you might see red lights on and around SH and people in black robes entering or leaving the trails going up SH. I've personally seen red lights, but seeing as how they're used at night to prevent losing your night vision, it's a more logical option. During high school I worked at a movie theater. I was an usher, not very exciting, but as a high schooler it was fine. Nevertheless, I was being trained and guided, and had to clean the theaters and take out the trash to the compactor. The elevator to the compactor always felt weird for me, and I'm not claustrophobic at all. After a while one of my coworkers told me that a past employee years ago had a heart attack in that elevator, and that they found his body the day after. This was the reason why they were so paranoid on always having ushers on pairs and never leaving them alone. Even though I thought it was BS because an employee said it. On Sundays the theater was barely active, and when it was just children, teens, or Hispanic families, which were nice most of the time there. I remember going into a Spanish following movie at one of the rooms, it was room 6 I believe, and I was alone since my companion was late. This was the opening shift, mind you. So I was brushing and sweeping the popcorn after the people left, and I noticed the reflection as if a person was on the projector room. "How's it going, Brandon?" I called as that was one of my managers, or so I thought. After a while I heard steps coming to my aisle and I chuckled brashly saying, "What took you so long?" And I froze in pause as there was no one behind me. I thought it was them pulling a prank, but then I heard the steps again and I just rushed down outside the theater. Later on the managers confirmed to me that in fact a guy died in the elevator to the trash compactor, also suspicious since the trash compactor elevator is close to theater room 6. And everyone would say not to go alone to theater 6. Every time we would sweep we would notice someone at the projector. But no one was inside. It was strange and creepy. I do not know what it is of that movie theater nowadays. But from friends that have gone they have told me sometimes they noticed a person on the projector and asked if they still did the old tape projectors. I said yes to make them feel enthralled, but that just made me even more suspicious of that movie theater. This is an old story from my home country of Mauritius. Back in the day, when the island was still very rural, a man was riding his motorcycle at night. While driving he notices a beautiful woman walking all alone. He stops and asks if she needs a ride home. She says yes and gets on the bike. Noticing that she's cold, he lends her his jacket and continues driving. They arrive in her village and stop at her house. She quickly thanks him and runs to her door. He's so mesmerized by her beauty that he forgets to ask for his jacket. No big deal, he thinks, he'll just come back tomorrow. Besides, it'll give him an excuse to see her again. He returns the next day and knocks on the door. An old lady opens it and greets him. He says, I accidentally left my jacket with your daughter when dropping her off last night, could I see her please? She calls her daughter downstairs, but it's a totally different girl. He says no, it was your other daughter, to which the mom replies, my other daughter has been dead for years. The man was shocked and refused to believe her, so the mom took him to the cemetery to show him the grave. Sure enough, her daughter was dead. And hanging on the tombstone was his jacket. This abandoned convent house I used to live down the road from in a small West Texas town has a hell of a lot of rumors about it. Officially it was shut down due to a tornado weakening the infrastructure, but kept up for historical preservation, built by Germanic Carmelites in the 30s. Odd thing is, this was a region not known for large or devastating tornadoes, and as the years went by the stories came up about this house. One of the strangest theories that came about in that town I heard from my cousin, and that the real reason it was shut down was the priest impregnating the nuns and sisters, and having to hide the evidence over the years by killing and burying the newborns in the basement levels. Red tag. A hospital assistant and a nurse stepped inside the elevator to head to basement 2, where the parking area is. On the way to basement 2, they have to pass by basement 1, which is where the morgue is located. The elevator stopped in basement 1, and the doors opened. The hospital assistant and nurse saw a naked man running towards the elevator. The hospital assistant frantically pushed the close button of the elevator before the man could get in. As the elevator resumed its descent to basement 2, the nurse asked why the hospital assistant closed the door before the man could get in. The hospital assistant said, "Didn't you see the red tag on his wrist? Red tags are for dead people who are scheduled to be embalmed the following day." The nurse was puzzled. Red tag? You mean something like this? The nurse showed the red tag on her wrist. There is an abandoned flat in an apartment complex in my city. People claim they hear all sorts of noises from the place even though it's locked and unused since past 30 or so years. Legend goes, it's haunted or some evil energy resides there. Everyone who has lived there has had bad things happen to them. Enough bad luck that it ruins your life. Last couple to live there lost their son. The husband got some mystery illness that he couldn't shake off. The wife kept hearing voices/sounds in the house, and eventually thought she is going mad as a result of grief from losing her son. The couple got divorced. She went to her parents' house only to realize she can't hear any of the noises/sounds outside of her house. The husband experienced something terrible the first night without his wife, and ran away from the flat. They never came back. Their stuff is still there. Some relative of theirs came to collect some sentimental items. Did a prayer there before entering and locked the door some 30 odd years ago. The door hasn't been opened since. The property is still owned by the couple. People living the same building say they hear furniture dragging, cutlery being thrown, banging, footsteps. Sometimes the TV or radio comes on and plays full volume. Every city around the world has a haunted house. But this one is chilling to me because the son who died was my dad's best friend. My grandfather says it's all nonsense. My granny promptly tells him to not invite trouble into our house by insulting the evil spirits. La Llorona, or the Weeping Woman. There are many interpretations to this legend, but this one is my favorite. There was a woman who was poor, but beautiful, and she had 2 sons. She meets a rich man one day and they fall in love, and soon get married. Over time, her new husband starts paying more attention to her sons rather than her, which makes her jealous and enraged. Out of spite, she takes her boys out one night and leads them to a river, where she proceeds to push them in the water and hold them down until their necks break. Once she realized what she had done, she starts to weep and lose her sanity, feeling guilty for killing her own children out of jealousy. Knowing she couldn't take back what she had done, she drowns herself in the river. They say that if you walk by that same river and you're not one of her children, her spirit will drown you in that river. Gave me chills first time I heard it. Tantal, the plural Tantal, a terrifying and frightening name that the inhabitants of the marshes fear, and even the children of them. When the child does not sleep at night and for some reason, his mother must only threaten him with it, so he calls him sleep, come the Tantal, then fear rears in him and he sleeps compelled and patiently over his pain and the reasons for crying, and the marshes look differently completely from what is found in cities, dark alleys, cemeteries and deserts. In the marshes it is fierce and harmful and cuts roads to fishermen and travelers between one floating village and another and controls large areas and deprives human access to it. Therefore fish and birds proliferate in them and their reed forests are intertwined, and there are tens of stories told by the inhabitants of the marshes and their hosts in their homes. They are always frightening stories, including the story of the mighty Hafiz whom no force in this universe can conquer, or the mother of slaves in the marshes of the Great Hungary while he is in the form of a black slave. He was alone, making strange noises and changing their sizes and shapes at any moment to frighten travelers. When we asked the elders of the marsh Arabs, their answer was that they are demons out of obedience to God Almighty, and they relate that to myths. Don't search it, it's disturbing. A woman breaks down on the I-47. She can't hear a thing, not even crickets. There isn't a soul around. She is texting her mother to help her see what's wrong, and from the sounds she heard, her mother declares she has a flat tire. She is about to get out, when she hears a scraping noise. Plick scrape, plick scrape, plick scrape. She looks up, and sees a creature, with holes where eyes should be, a messed up jaw, and a limping leg. She hops in the back seat, almost screams, but catches herself, as her car wasn't on, and though the creature may not have seen her. She can hear it louder and louder. Plick scrape, plick, and it comes to a stop. She can hear heavy breathing, but other than that, nothing. She hears it again. Plick scrape, plick scrape, plick scrape. But this time, fading away. She stays stiff as a board, until sunlight. She gets up, looks around, and the creature is gone. An old farmer stops by to help her, and he couldn't help but see her staring. He explains how he had an accident on the I-47 few years back, and he has a hollowed eye, and a dislocated jaw. He helps her fix her tire, and she is about to get back in her truck, when she hears it again. Plick scrape, plick scrape, plick scrape. She looks around, startled, and notices, the old man has a peg leg. Limping. She is frozen by fear. The old man looks at her, asks her what's wrong. She says nothing and gets in her car. He hops in his truck, and pulls up by her car. He makes a gesture to roll down the window, and he says this. The dead man never forgets. The lady of Lake Worth supposedly, she and her boyfriend, maybe fiancé? I've heard it both ways, were parked down by the lake, making out, when the car fell out of park and rolled into the lake, drowning both of them. They say if you're parked by the lake, on a full moon night, and she comes out of the lake, she'll lay her hands on your windshield and make a horrible groaning, moaning noise. If she leaves handprints on your windshield, then you're going to die. I've also heard that the handprints she leaves behind also mean that you're related to either her or her boyfriend/fiancé, and that enrages her to the point that she tries to kill you.